It's funny to me how so often in these news pieces, especially when we have multiple pieces on the same day, they almost seem to follow a similar theme on many occasions, and this time the theme is beloved British brands having a either resurgence or reimagining or a rebirth in some cases, and this time we're talking about said rebirth. Now those who know me know I love Bristol cars. They're not for everyone, they're quite oddball. I think the best way to describe Bristol, at least by my standards, would be imagine if Rolls-Royce was a GT car company. They are far more exclusive, far more expensive in pretty much every era than the equivalent Aston Martin, Jaguar, even something like a Morgan. They're outstandingly rare. In fact, in any production year of their nearly 80-year history since around 1945, they've never built more than 100 cars in a single year, and that's like the peak of any numbers they've ever released. They are astonishingly rare. I'll probably flash up on screen a vehicle which was virtually identical to one which I almost owned. Relatively recently, actually, within the past probably year and a half, something like that. Back when I had my Lincoln, the second Premier, the white and gold one, I almost swapped it for a gold Bristol just like this one. And it probably would have been a mistake. It needed welding work and finding parts probably isn't easy, but there's just part of me that's always wanted a Bristol. In the case of their vehicles though, like I said, they're not for everyone. They commonly use big American V8 power, such as the one which I was going to have, a nearly 6-litre Chrysler motor, and then more commonly a lot of BMW engines as well, both in their earlier history and more modern stuff. And even though in more recent years they did show off a vehicle called the Bristol Bullet, which again I'll show here in the video, once again BMW powered, it was intended to have a £95,000 price, which all things considered is actually surprisingly competitive and reasonable almost for a brand like Bristol, and that one ultimately didn't really go anywhere. They built one, it was shown at Goodwood, I believe I saw it in person, I think I was there that year, I don't recall, there were so many cars there, and ultimately, like many of these brands, as the story goes over and over again, they were liquidated, you know, like Marques, like your TVR, same kind of thing happens over and over again. Between 2011 and 2020 though, of course 2020 being their most recent liquidation, they were owned by a brand called Camcorp, who interestingly also owned Fraser-Nash developments, and of course I've talked about Fraser-Nash way back in Unsung Heroes, another supercar startup kind of thing which was featured at Goodwood years ago called the Fraser-Nash Namir. That one had very striking design, kind of B-engineering Adonis style, didn't really go anywhere, but a cool connection there with some of these striking vehicles, different ideas, not exactly expecting or hoping for mass volume production, that's just not their thing. And interestingly, the car which didn't turn out, the Bullet, was based on the same essential platform as the Morgan Aero 8, which, even in its own limited way, still had more success than the Bristol did. Now where things get interesting and where things get into this particular news piece is with a chap called Jason Wharton, who of course is a Brit himself, based I believe around Essex, an investor in property, etc., and he bought a number of things regarding Bristol. There was some conjecture as to him apparently not buying all of what he thought he'd bought, but that seems to get in the weeds a little bit. It seems that as recently as this news though, and it has been reported on by multiple sources, not just me, so it seems to be true, that he is still the intellectual property owner for Bristol. He also, I believe, bought some of the tooling and stuff for making the actual vehicles, which of course always helps. And they have been focusing in more so on restoring existing Bristols, bringing them back up to collector's glory, which is a good way to take it. It's a good way of keeping the brand around, I would say, while you're tooling up for making a new car, or even if you never do. It just allows it to still technically be a thing, and even big brands like Porsche are doing certain upgrades to those vehicles, and they're not even that old. Now, where we get to the plans now is that on LinkedIn, he released an image, more like a concept rendering, if you will, the one which you'll see here, of their reimagining of where Bristol could go. Now, where things will probably disappoint some people is that they want to reinvent the brand as a modern, premier British electric GT company. Now, there's one word in there which a lot of you aren't going to like to hear, and of course it's a word which a lot of people don't like these days. For me, I'm definitely mixed on it. Electric vehicles for me are the kind of car where I have a lot of interest in if it's about the performance. I love electric performance cars. My single favourite electric vehicle on the market right now is the Lotus Elitra, which is a wild-looking SUV, 900 horsepower, absolutely crazy thing, still cheaper than the equivalent electric Range Rover and far more interesting to me. So when it's done interestingly, and clearly not just about the environment, it's more of just an exotic technical marvel really, a life-size RC GT car that you can use as a daily driver, that's when I love it. And I certainly don't care when people try to play the environmental card when all they're doing is literally moving their carbon upstream to the charger instead of from the vehicle. Motorcycles are another prime example. That's fantastic. You know, they're awesome. Stuff like a Rimac, it's just an undeniably amazing bit of kit. That's why this actually does still excite me, because funnily enough, it's clearly not just me that's been having these ideas. I again proposed how to bring Marques back. Use the electric mini platform, make a modern day mini Marques, and market it as a reasonably priced, which these days is like 50 grand, city runabout for the exotic buyer. You get to have the environmental card, but still have a super exclusive, wild looking little British GT. And although not on that kind of scale, that appears to be what Bristol is trying to do. Now this one certainly seems to be inspired by the 411. You can definitely see that kind of shape in there. They're intending it to be around their 80th anniversary in 2026, and they also interestingly have two other models planned as well. A Bristol Speedster, also around 2026. You could reasonably assume it will probably be based on a similar platform, I would guess, and also a Buccaneer and Pullman around 2030. If all of this stuff does come to fruition, which I would imagine that if you do outsource some of this stuff, it's probably a bit easier to try and start up an existing brand, especially if you already have stuff like, you know, chassis, frames, tooling, to then incorporate electric stuff into the mix, because so much rapid development is being done on electric stuff, and I'm sure there are plenty of ready-to-go packages which you can buy, and especially when you're charging the kind of prices that Bristol would be as such an exclusive brand, it's not outside the realm of possibility that they could make their money back and stick around this time, which of course was part of the reason why I suggested it for Marques. It's not like you necessarily have to build an entirely new wondrous engine from the ground up, and given Bristol's history of using engines from other brands, probably most notably the Fighter with the Viper's V10 engine to great effect, one of the quickest British supercars ever made, well, that itself has always been part of Bristol's history, so why not embrace that and go down the electric route of using somebody else's power plants? You could save a lot of time on tooling, etc. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I'm sure some of the traditionalists, especially with a brand like this, probably won't like the idea so much. For me, I'm excited purely to see Bristol have another chance, in the exact same way as I would be for Marques. I'm really keen to see how this goes. I wish them the best of luck. I really hope it works out. Electric or not, I really don't care. As long as it's back in some form, it will be great to see as and when and if that happens. That's it for this news piece. The second one later today is regarding Jaguar's return, something which of course we've been kind of wondering what's happening with that for a while now, and we do finally have some decent news, so stick around for that later on today, and best of luck to Bristol. But for now, thanks for watching.